Well, hello, John Baird. Fancy meeting you
Yes,
here today.
yes, it's great to be here today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for rescheduling this. Uh,
Yes,
uh, it's just helpful to get a recording. So,
yes. Are we all good? Everybody, this is not a video, right? This is just recording, right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I am recording the video.
Oh, are you?
I
Okay.
am.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Does it everything look good on my end? Yeah.
Well, considering what you have to work with, it looks fantastic.
My wife would say that too.
Uh,
I have an identical twin, you know,
oh,
and it's crazy at times when we talk about all that. So yeah, it's yeah, we
that-
look a lot alike.
that's
So
fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you for the book,
you're
Leading
welcome.
with Heart. I'm in love with it. It's fantastic. I love the structure of it. I
Mm,
love the little summaries at the end and
mm,
the questions to lead into conversations. The last chapter on teams and what to do with your team projects is
mhm,
worth the
mhm,
price of the book.
mm,
It
mm.
is fantastic.
Well,
Uh,
that's great to hear. We
You
we are
also,
getting a lot of feedback on. I mean, we didn't write the book to be a recipe or a sort of a manual, but we had a lot of coaches and a lot of teams that have said this is sort of the perfect kind of thing. You could read a chapter, and then you could answer the questions, and you could have a whole team building session around fears or needs or purpose or what are we not saying to each other that we need to say. I mean, all those things come out.
yes,
Yes.
yes, fantastic, fantastic. Um, you solved a problem that has troubled me for a long time. And I'm actually working with a fellow right now. We're writing a book together, and literally we are writing it together, not like one
Mhm.
person writes it and the other person. I mean, so it you can imagine
Mhm.
it's painful.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but I just don't have a great feeling about these books that have like I, John, and then this is what you say, and then it's, I, Edward, and this is what Edward says. So
Mhm.
you in this book, and I don't know who decided or how this came about, you put basically you created one person out of the two of you. And so often it's like, well, John was on a walk, a coaching walk with so and so, or
Right.
Ed was
Right.
doing this. And oh, it's so much better. It's just so
Yeah.
much better. Who
Yeah.
came up with that? Do you recall at all?
Well, I think this was one, Dan, that was a a journey and a work in progress because I think we started off, to your point, somewhat separate. We had certainly very similar voices, similar frameworks around how we wanted the book content wise to come across, but we worked a lot on getting those voices similar. And I think our editor, Hollis from Harper Business, was just great in making sure that happened. Edward was also really good at that as well. And I don't think I'm as good a storyteller as Edward is. And I learned to tell stories more like Edward did. And so there was learning on both sides. And I think we came together, and I hope it came off as one voice.
I think so. Now, except for, and I don't want to jump right there yet, but in the purpose
Yeah.
chapter, you talk
Yeah.
about your lights on, lights off experience. Oh man, I just love that story. So, but we'll say that for a second, okay?
Okay.
Um, I, I, why the order? Let me read the five questions. And like I said, I love the structure. I love the fact that you've structured it around questions. The questions are, what do you need to be at your best? What fears are holding you back? What desires drive you and which might derail you? What are your greatest gifts and what is your purpose? My question about those five questions is, um, what is significant about the order?
Yeah. Well, we talked a lot about the sequence of this. It's a very good question. I don't think we've ever been asked that question. We've done a lot of podcasts. And, the way we actually came about it was that we felt like you need to start with your needs. You've got to be able to say, are you as a leader and your team as well, are you getting your needs met? Your physical needs, your psychological, emotional needs, your physical needs in terms of space, nutrition, all that. You have to start with yourself, right? And then we thought the next thing is it's really important for you to sort of peel back a little bit and be able to say, before you can be ready to actually do some really good leadership, you've got to be vulnerable with yourself. So you got to ask yourself, what am I afraid of? So the fear one, we thought, was good to get a little bit early in the book, we thought, because that's sort of a little bit deeper and harder, I think, to talk about. Desires is about motivation, what motivates you, right? And that gets a little bit more external, not quite as deep. So it goes from sort of really inside, and then it kind of goes out. Gifts, it's like share your gifts with others, with the team. And then ultimately, what is your purpose, right? And then how does purpose impact culture? So it kind of flows from that internal out to the external, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Thanks for explaining it to me. I was a little too dull to actually try. I was watching it and trying to think about, now, why does this one follow this one? But from internal to external is a journey that you take us on in the book, and very well, I would say, for me, at least personally. I wanted to ask you another question about questions. And what is the difference in effect between a question and a statement? What is the difference in effect between a question and a statement? I know you're a professional question asker. You're a curious person. And I'm just curious about your perspective on questions.
Well, I mean, the art of questions is the art of coaching and is the art of leading with heart, because you have to lead with questions, because there are many assumptions we're making in our teams with ourselves that we need to sort of step back and say, what does that look like to you? So I always start with a question to explore those assumptions, because there's so much in that world I don't understand. What happened an hour before that meeting? How is that team really feeling after the weekend? We didn't have a very good quarter, so how's everybody feeling before we start this meeting, right? And so I think questions are ways to get people to sort of talk a little bit about where they are with everything. I do like, Dan, what questions? What does that look like to you? Say more about that. What does that mean? And so you leave it more generic and you let them sort of define it. There is a point where statements become part of the conversation as well. It feels like to me, this is definitely a decision to make. Would you agree? What is that decision we're trying to make? If you had to make a statement about a script or a message you wanted to send to the team, what would that statement look like? So you kind of the funnel technique is you start sort of broadly, ask those questions, say more about that, peel it back, and then come out with a statement. And usually they solve their own problem, but sometimes not. I mean, there are clients I have, I'll say, stop. If you do that, that's probably not a good thing. You would not want to say that, right? This would not be a good thing for you or the team. So that's a statement. And again, it depends. It depends a lot on the client and where we are.
Well, good feedback includes statements, right? You're saying what you see, you're saying what you heard, you're saying what happened. And I'm just a huge fan of curiosity and question asking. And I think it's a powerful skill. And here's what happened to me. So I'm reading the table of contents. So when people buy books, right? And I don't have to buy books. People send me books. So
I know you're one of those people that they want you actually to read the book.
Yeah. And I'm going to confess to you. So your book arrived, and it's a little thick for me.
Well, that's good feedback.
It was that's for me. I like short books. I like brevity, and anyway, when I pick up a book, it's still I've read the book. So when you pick up a book you're going to buy, you open it up, you look at the table of contents, and then maybe I'll thumb through, look for a few sentences, maybe look at the endings and see, try to figure out how the author's writing. But when you look at the table of contents, if, for example, you would have made a statement instead of a question, I would have had the opportunity then to decide, well, I already know that, or that's not that interesting. But when you say, what fears are holding you back? So you could say, these are the 5 fears that hold people back.
Yeah.
Okay. That's sort of like, that's good. I mean, that's useful.
Mm-hmm.
But when you ask the question, now I am engaged.
Mm.
It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Just
So
wonderful.
that piqued your interest, right? The questions made you want to actually look at the book and go deeper with the book.
Well, I
Yeah.
was much less judgmental from the
Huh.
beginning.
Okay. Yeah. 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 No, I
Yeah.
think that's well, I mean, I think these five conversations interesting, Dan, they really came out of all the interviews we did, which are documented in the book, and then the hundreds of coaching clients we've had through the years in small companies, startup companies, but also large Fortune 500 companies as well. Um, and discovering that the people who led with heart and got results were individuals who were able to have the difficult conversations with themselves, with their teams, and with their organizations, to be able to be transparent and say, this is not going to be a good quarter. Also, I want to emphasize to you, we are not going off mission. We are still purpose driven. These things are still going to be important. This has changed, but this has not changed. I mean, getting people to actually have those difficult conversations and do it with heart and be transparent. So, I mean, we discovered that these five questions were ones that we found kept coming up over and over with the people who led teams and got teams to be effective and had safety and transparency on their teams.
Yes. Well, for me, it's perhaps the greatest contribution, and there are many in the book, but that's perhaps the greatest contribution of the book for me is like let's set this around these five really important recurring questions.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, just wonderful. You, by the way, you did mention about being transparent in the book. There's the story of the socks, and spend $1 million on innovating new products, and then go back to the organization and say, well, we're a sock company.
We're a sock company, right?
Right.
Well, that's a big one. I'm glad you picked that one up because, I mean, talk about being purpose driven. We're a sock company, and for every pair of socks that one purchases, we give one back. We have really veered from our mission, and to have Dave, Dave Heath from Bombas be able to step back and make that decision was not an easy one, because marketing dollars and all that had, and teams that are disappointed that really were moving along. I mean, they course corrected around purpose, which was pretty outstanding.
Yes. Wonderful. Just wonderful. So speaking of purpose, I'd like to delve into purpose with you for just a bit.
Okay.
And I actually had a client email me, and she said, I'd like to engage you as a coach. This is so interesting. Most people aren't quite as directed. And she emailed me and said, I'd like to engage you as a coach, and I want to talk about purpose. I mean, it's like, that's really an unusual email, right?
Place to, yes, exactly.
So that makes me doubly interested in the chapter on purpose. Let me start by asking you, how big of an issue is this in organizational life, having or not having purpose?
It could have been emphasized. I mean, if we were to write another book, it would be about how do you actually make purpose real in organizations for yourself and your culture. And then we'd probably write a double click on the chapter on fears. Needs has gotten a lot of press as well, but those are ones that seem to come out. It's interesting. People don't start companies without a purpose. And it usually starts with the CEO, with his or her sort of idea that this is something that they want to do. When you think about why Steve Jobs started Apple, around wanting to innovate with products that could be easy to use, and it could help people communicate and connect with each other better. That purpose has never changed from Apple. It still is there, right? And maybe innovation was sort of part of that, because they have a very innovative culture. So innovation is part of the purpose of that culture, always creating and innovating. But it starts with the leader. He or she has to have a sense of who they are and why did they actually start this company. And then you can broaden your purpose to include the values of the organization. The organization can help define some of those values for you. But purpose starts with leaders. You can't just sort of say, this is your purpose. Find a purpose. It usually starts with the why and the journey to actually start a company and to have an endeavor. But there's a personal purpose, and sometimes it's driven by personal needs. I want to show so-and-so that I was successful. My purpose is to actually recover from all the adversity I've had and climb that hill and show that my purpose is actually to prove that I can actually do this. It can be very personal, and it can also be very mission driven, and it could help the world. So lots of different ways to think about that.
Yes. Yeah. And you sort of hit on a few of the topic headings as you were talking about that a bit. So when people get the book, they'll see some of that in the book. It is so powerful. I had a fellow say to me I have an opportunity to sell my business, and I really thought about it a lot, and then I decided not to because I really want to impact the lives of the people who work here. Wow. Isn't that something?
And Dan, that was that person's, that was his purpose. That was,
I think,
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, to define that and to be clear about that.
Yeah.
If you had a purpose like that to really impact the lives of people working around you, it would drive so much of what you do around benefits, around hiring, around culture, around the way people are treated, about retaining people. I think we're missing the boat these days, Dan, a little bit with the fact that we've got all these jobs. The job, data was really, really good that just came out around the fact that we're hiring all these people. What are we doing about the people, Dan, that are still in our companies, even though we have people leaving, the migration is still happening? How are we retaining our good people? How are we motivating the people that are still there, that have been with us for a long time? That's a question that I think the book talks about a little bit, but probably it's one that would just generate a lot of conversation with leaders.
Absolutely. So if I recall, in the purpose chapter, you start to use the word inspiration, and so you're throwing the word inspiration into the bucket of purpose.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that inspire us, like you mentioned, perhaps overcoming some huge adversity that you had in your life. You're concerned about legacy. You want to, and so are you comfortable with the idea that purpose is that which inspires you?
Yeah, I think there's always an inspirational, what brings you joy? And it comes back to the why. And when we coach people, Dan, that are just down about the economy, the world, everything that's happening, and the fact that they're now resetting employment, they're not hiring, or they're getting rid of some people as well, we have to come back to the sense of the question. So why did you start this company? Let's remind ourselves, we're still purpose driven. So I do think that becomes a really important question to really ask people as we think about motivating with purpose. And then what does inspire you? The inspiration has to be there. People inspire different ways. I mean, it isn't always charisma that inspires, but there is a message that actually connects with people. And we find leaders who lead with heart connect in some way. Some people do that better one-on-one if people are more introverted and not as strong, but they're very, very good at innovation of a product. So they inspire through innovation by asking questions. How can we do that better? And how can we serve the enterprise business much better? People love that kind of innovation. I think Steve Jobs inspired a lot because of innovation. He wanted it to be better and better and better. And he had this goal about what he saw. How do we get to that goal? He inspired through a sense of innovation. So we have to tap into what inspires us, what brings us joy, and share that. A big part of the book, Dan, is naming a fear, naming a joy, naming an inspiration, saying it inspires me to do this, and then name it, say it. And then ask the question, what inspires you about our purpose? And then people will come at that very differently, but you need to create the climate for inspiration and seed the conversation. And leading with heart leaders do that very, very well in different ways.
Oh, fantastic. So the chapter on purpose, there's a language in there that I was delighted to see. So I've observed with the relationships with people that many of the transformative moments happen when you reflect back to them their energy. When you say, "Oh, you just really lit up. What's going on for you?" And then all of a sudden they realize something about themselves. Or you
Yeah.
might say, "Your shoulders started drooping, your voice lowered. What's happening?" And give them a chance to reflect on this, ebb and flow of energy. So you had a transformative moment when someone showed you your energy. Just tell us the story because I just love it.
It's so funny because just listening to you talk, Dan, I can see where you get some of your energy, right? As we focus on purpose and being purpose driven. I mean, it's just like, as you ask the questions, you lights on and lights off, very important concept. I will often in a conversation say to a client, boy, you are really lights on about that. This whole conversation, you've been sort of like same plane, et cetera, but boy, nonverbal cues, eye contact, facial expressions, gestures, et cetera. You were lights on there. What is that about? And usually underneath that, Dan, is a sense of sort of what brings them joy, what their purpose is all about, I'll ask the question, why is that? And usually there's a story that can be told. I love stories. I love pulling stories out, helping them create their own stories, but getting them to tell them. So I don't know, the lights on, lights off for me was just an opportunity to just step back and look at myself and say, I love the work I was doing with the company I was in, but I wanted something more. And I discovered through that process when I talked about the startup world and wanting to work with new ventures and all of that, I was lights on. Now remember, these were consultants we hired and they videotaped us and they showed us when we were lights on and lights off. So we saw the difference between not so lights on and then really lights on. So it was pretty powerful. So I would ask our listeners, where are you? What are you doing when you're in a meet? When it's lights on for you, what is it about? Yeah. So
Powerful thing. I took the impression from that story in the book that that was a transformative moment, that it set you on a course that you're still on to this day.
yes. Yeah. I love the startup world. It's a little messy. Having had large corporation experience with a lot of big companies, I do like taking companies from the beginning, early stage to middle. And I also love taking them public. The coaching process and even leading with heart is different in early stage with 20 people or a small team to middle stage with more funding and more hiring and more C-suite people that come in that sort of add to the original founding team, and then getting ready for IPO. I love the process. For me, yes. I have a business side of me, right? And leading with heart is very there's a correlation between leading with heart cultures and getting results. If you continue to retain, engage, do the 5 questions as we've talked about, you will actually get results as well. You will actually create a climate where people feel like this is an important place to be. I want this company to be successful, not just the CEO, but the rest of the company.
Yes. In the book, I hope I'm not pulling this out of the wrong source. I think you talk about Noom, and they are doing an IPO pretty soon, I think, or have they just recently done it?
They have not IPO'd yet.
Yeah.
They're in the process of that. There's a lot of companies that are positioned nicely, and Noom is positioned very nicely for that to happen at some point in time, that are waiting until the market really changes. But Noom is an exciting culture because they've gotten very good results. They've been very successful, and they've done it through a lot of values. You probably remember the whole idea of kindness. Do you remember the kindness value? At Noom, when people are not kind to each other, they call that out. It's like that was not said in the right way, or you were not kind. And when somebody says you're not kind, it's not like they're confronting you with defensiveness. You need to be able to say, when somebody says that, tell me what I did. What happened there? That was certainly not my intent, but good intent doesn't always make it okay. You
Right.
know, they still had an impact on the other person, so talk about it. So
Yes.
I love that value of kindness because I'm a person that treating people with respect and kindness is very important. It's all about leading with heart as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think in the book, the value is transparency, be transparent and kind, or
And
they
kind
put those,
together.
yeah,
The
something
two
like
are
that.
together,
Yeah.
transparency and kind. Ah, you really read that well. So yes,
Well,
no, they're important because yeah, one without the other is not probably the value that they have there. Yeah.
yes. How did writing Leading with Heart change you?
Mm. It was a joy writing with Edward. We both learned so much. And because the book was 2 years in the making, it started off being this one thing. The questions were always there, but it wasn't framed in the five in the right way once the data came together in the five. And I think the joy was in the journey, the writing back and forth, the learning from Edward, the framing of the book, the tightening it up so that it became something that was readable, getting it packaged into these 5 questions so it still felt rich and full. Yeah, no, and then also being able to bring stories into it that we felt we could actually use to illustrate compelling stories. We've gotten a lot of feedback. The stories are very compelling to people. So, and they're not often in books like this. So we're very excited that we got the stories, I think, right.
Hmm.
For the most part, I think.
See if you can fill in the blanks. Before we wrote this book, I was. After we wrote this book, I am.
Mm. Before I think we wrote this book, is it for I or we?
You know,
Speaking for myself,
for you, I'm interested in your
yeah,
story and
in
your
my
journey.
story.
Yeah.
So before I wrote the book, um, I don't think I had any idea how much of a gift the writing of the book would be to me.
Hmm.
The gift of Edward, the gift of Hollis, our publisher, how much I learned. I mean, I'm a former professor, so for me, the learning part, I have a high value on learning. For me, I just before it was like, gosh, I was a little bit like not stale, but my coaching practice was going well. It needed to be uh, just ignited. The book ignited my passion for my work. So before I was passionate, but not at the same level. I wrote the book, and now that the book is out, I'm just finding my coaching work just so much more rich, and I'm using the framework even more than I used before. I feel a real joy in the fact that that process enabled me to get there. So now I can begin sharing the questions in the process with others. So where am I now? I'm just using it and doing better with it. I think I'm a better coach as a result of having written that book.
Mm-hmm. When you approach a coaching conversation, do you come at it kind of like, let's see where this goes, or do you come at it with a end in mind?
Well, before clients come online with me, I have on Google Docs, I have a coaching agenda. But remember, we've also done a 360. I also use, Dan, the Hogan, the Hogan I think we mentioned the Hogan in the book, but
Yeah.
it's this instrument that sort of gives a good idea of what's natural, what defaults are not good or are good for people. So we have a framework. I often, because I'm coaching almost all CEOs, I'll often interview the board. So I have a lot of data. And we have a development plan of 3 or 4 goals with some very concrete actions to get there. They're always on the coaching agenda because we're always using that feedback. That's always there. How are we doing on these things? And then they add to the coaching agenda the topic of the day. And usually the topic of the day does connect back to a particular goal. I try to do that. And at the end of it, we always finish by saying, so what are the actions as a result? And how do they connect with what our outcomes are for coaching? Outcome-based coaching is so important. Without outcomes in coaching, it's a nice conversation, but where does it lead? What are you changing? What are you doing tomorrow? What are you doing this week? How will that team conversation happen? call me before you have that conversation. Let's go through it and script it one more time, because that's something you need to do. The language isn't exactly right. Oh my gosh, it's if you're not working on real behaviors, Dan, as a coach, you're probably not getting into the real meat of change and transformation.
Right, right. Well, I have to say, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for rescheduling it, by the way, so we could record it. And I couldn't be more pleased or happy or glad that I read. It's marked up. I always write in books, and honestly, I had to stop for me, a great book helps me think my own thoughts. And so I'm writing down things, and I had this idea, and I took out 2 or 3 documents, and I jotted this. And so there's this dual thing happening of like, I'm learning, and then oh yeah, and then maybe it's a good idea, maybe it turns out it's a crappy idea. But this was one of those books that did that for me, is just notes and all kinds of ideas, and plus just really, really practical. So I hope everybody that's watches this and who is interested in leading with heart will grab a copy.
Thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed our conversation together, and thanks for the very deep, rich. It was a shorter interview than ones I've had, but definitely in depth on a few things. You took a few things and went in depth, and I really enjoyed that conversation in that way.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, go get them, my friend.
Thank you so much. And thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Best of luck to you. Okay.
Take care.
Take care.